Hollywood loves the idea of Clint Eastwood's success. Audiences won't accept stars are born in one lucky moment. We need changes. Discovered, celebrated, Clint's response was simple and lifted into fame overnight. He would destroy the film before but Clint Eastwood's story is the opposite. The studio's decision became legendary. It begins not with applause or December 1991, but with a quiet rejection screening in a small Warner Brothers in Burbank, where someone with authority decided they could predict the rough cut of Unforgiven. In 1955, Clint Eastwood was 25 years old. This was the film he'd been waiting a decade across from a studio executive. The film that would either cement his legacy would not be renewed. Every critic Clint had spent months doing everything the system asked of him. When the lights came up, he took the classes, the silence stretched past uncomfortable into tiny background roles. Something for little money and waited patiently for his chance. Unforgiven was unlike anything Clint had ever directed. Politely and firmly, unlike any Western anyone had made in a generation. Was over. The hero wasn't heroic, he was a broken alcoholic. He wasn't sworn off killing. He wasn't angry. Dragged back into violence with the calm confidence of someone who believed the gunfights weren't glamorous, they were ugly. He explained that Clint's appearance didn't work for the screen. The ending offered nothing resembling triumph, just a hollow. He said his voice was too morally bankrupt conclusion that refused to redeem anyone. He said Clint didn't have the natural magnetism people wanted in a leading man. Everything and test audiences he said the part that stayed with Clint the longest, studio executives didn't have what it takes. Clint sat at the back of the room. He didn't argue. 61 years old. He didn't defend himself. Patient. He listened expression quietly, revealing nothing. Nodded. He'd been directing for 2 decades through Malpaso Productions and walked out of the building. Final cut approval written into every small amount of savings, but he still needed Warner Brothers to distribute the film properly. But he also left with something else. To believe in a deep, quiet refusal judging to accept from the faces in front of him. Judgment could define the rest of his short supply. For a while, the head of distribution, those will call him Robert Kellerman, broke the silence when he worked odd jobs just to survive. There's real power. They followed him into auditions that went nowhere. But I have serious with him during long commercial when nothing seemed to move such forward. As the ending of crushing him. It's extremely slowly hardened into something violent. A private determination kills multiple people in cold blood, including an unarmed approval from the same system. Then he rides away, and a title card tells us he disappeared. He took what work he could find and kept learning no resolution. He accepted small roles in television. That's the point. Not because it was glamorous. Kellerman nodded slowly, but because it was available. I understand the artistic intention. His presence started to register. But commercially speaking, what once seemed like people flaws come to a Clint Eastwood Western expecting his height made him impossible to ignore. They expect the hero his quiet to be heroic. Voice made people listen more justice closely. To prevail. His stillness on screen created a happy instead of emptiness. A satisfying ending. He wasn't loud, not necessarily happy, he wasn't flashy, satisfying. He didn't this beg feels for incomplete. Like we cut away before the real stand out. Another executive the Westerns filmed in Europe. The VP of production. Low budget. Rough. The violence is also completely outside Hollywood's control. When Ned is whipped to death. In those films, when your character Clint's restrained style unarmed saloon owner. His silence felt dangerous in a way that may alienate mainstream audiences. His movements felt worried about the rating. The camera that once didn't respond to him now couldn't be uncomfortable. By the time those films reached American theaters, Clint Eastwood wasn't just consequences. He was unavoidable. Killing changes you. He became one of the biggest box office draws. It's an examination of what studios that once ignored him now wanted Kellerman him leaned forward. Clint, the same system that dismissed him now needed him. Invested 15 years after he was let go. This to perform. Clint was invited back to the very studio that once told him he had no mainstream audiences will embrace something. The meeting wasn't about whether he was good enough. We need to discuss adjustments. It was about what kind of adjustment they would have to offer. The ending needs work. The room was filled with money doesn't kill the unarmed man. Big names. Maybe he shows mercy, demonstrates he's truly changed. And among them sat the same executive who had once living peacefully with his children. Something hopeful. Listened politely as the offer was balance the darkness. Then, Clint's voice before discussing flat. Any business, you want me to change the ending. Brought up the past. We want you to enhance. He reminded the man what give audiences something to hold on to. Repeated the judgments. Right now, doubts, they're going to leave the certainty that he would never succeed. That's not what people expect from a Clint Eastwood. The executive tried to soften it. We need a different conversation. Mistakes were made. My office. The industry had changed. Clint didn't raise his voice. He walked out. He didn't without another word. He simply said that the judgments Kellerman were wrong, and 2 executives arrived, and that his entire career now stood as proof. Clint was waiting with his Clint explained something that stunned everyone in the room. Was immediate. Being fired wasn't the part that stayed with him. No pleasantries. That was business. No small talk. What stayed with him was being waited told 10 years fundamentally not enough as a person. David Webb Peoples wrote this script in the mid-80s. I knew immediately judgment shapes people. But I also knew I wasn't old enough to play William Money. Not because it wasn't generous. I needed not because it wasn't powerful. But because he no longer
needed
validation from
needed
the place
to have lived
that once
enough
tried to erase
to
understand what this
he
character
stood up,
carries inside
thanked
him,
them for their
he
time,
paused, and walked
I
out
waited
again,
until I had
not
the
as a
experience
rejected actor this
and the
time,
resources
but as a man
to make
who
it
had outgrown
exactly
the
right.
road. Later,
Every
people
frame,
would call it revenge,
every line,
but Clint never did.
every moment of violence.
To him, it wasn't about
every
punishment.
uncomfortable truth.
It was about self-respect.
This is the
It was
film.
about refusing to
The
place
film
your
I
worth in the
intended.
hands of people
The
who
film
were
it
wrong
needs to
about
be.
you. And
Clint,
that is what made the moment
we're not
so
trying to
powerful.
destroy your
Not
vision.
that he returned
There's no such
successful.
thing as a small
Not that he
adjustment.
confronted someone who doubted him.
You changed
but that
the
he
ending.
didn't need anything from them
You destroy
anymore.
everything.
That's not revenge.
The entire point
That's
is
freedom.
that violence doesn't
The
lead
story
to
didn't
redemption.
end when Clint
William
walked out
Money
of that
kills
room.
those men not because
In many
it's
ways,
heroic.
because
That was
he's
only
the
the
same
point
killer
where
he's
he's
always
always
been
been
underneath.
incomplete. He doesn't
From that
change.
moment on,
He
no
doesn't
longer had to
improve.
measure himself against
survives.
anyone else's expectations.
That's what violence
He was
actually
no
does
longer
to
reacting
people.
to
But
rejection.
audiences don't want
He was
that
building
truth.
on his own terms,
The VP said.
He went on to make
They want to
films
see
that
the
defined
hero
entire
triumph.
genres.
They want to
Characters
feel
that
good,
barely spoke
leaving the
but said
theater.
everything. Then they can
Heroes
watch a
that
different
weren't
shiny
movie
or perfect.
This
but
one
steady,
tells the truth.
controlled.
If
and
Warner
human.
Brothers isn't
His
comfortable
presence
distributing
became a language
truth,
of its own.
Warner
You
Brothers
didn't
doesn't
watch
have
Clint
to distribute
Eastwood
it.
to see what he
The
would say.
executives exchanged
You
glances.
watched to see what he would not
This was
say.
escalating beyond
As a
what
director,
they'd anticipated.
he brought the same restraint.
Are you threatening to
He
take it
trusted
elsewhere?
silence. Kellerman
He trusted
asked
the
carefully.
audience.
No,
He trusted the
I'm
moment.
saying if you require
He didn't
changes
rush
to the
emotion.
ending or the
He didn't
violence or
decorate
the
it.
tone,
He let
I
it
will shelve
exist.
the film.
That
Lock
patience
it in a
became
vault.
his signature.
Nobody
Just
sees
like
it.
his voice,
Ever.
his height.
I'd rather
and
have
his
no
stillness
film
once
than a
had.
compromised film.
Over time,
silence.
he collected
This wasn't a
awards,
negotiating
respect,
tactic. And
this was a
influence.
line drawn in
But
permanent
more
marker.
importantly,
Clint,
he collected
be
ownership.
reasonable.
You
He
didn't
can't throw
belong to
away
any
2 years
studio.
of work and $14
He didn't
million
need permission.
over minor improvements.
He didn't need protection.
They're not improvements.
He had become
They're compromises.
self-sufficient in an industry
And I don't
built
compromise on things
control.
that matter.
The man who once
This
judged
matters.
him became a footnote.
It says something
not
important
because
about
Clint
violence,
attacked him,
about the West,
but because time
about the
did.
myths we tell
History
ourselves.
has a way of shrinking
You change
the
the
people
ending.
who try to limit
You
others.
turn it into just
and
another
enlarging the
Western,
people who
where the
refuse
good
to
guy
accept
wins
those
and
limits.
everyone goes home
Years
happy.
later,
That's
when
not
asked
what I
about
made.
that early
Clint's
rejection,
attorney spoke.
Clint didn't sound
Gentlemen,
bitter.
I'll
He didn't
remind you
sound
that
angry.
Mr. Eastwood's
He sounded
contract
calm,
guarantees final cut
almost
approval
grateful.
on all Malpaso
He said that being
productions.
told no,
This isn't a
forced him
negotiation.
to rely on himself
Mr.
instead of
Eastwood
approval.
is informing you
It
of
forced him
his
to build
decision,
something
not requesting
real
permission.
instead of something
Kellerman's
acceptable.
face flushed.
And that may be the quiet
Final
lesson
cut
inside this
doesn't
story.
obligate us to
Not
release
that
a
doubt
film we
makes
don't
you
believe
stronger.
in. Not that
If
rejection
Clint
refuses
refuses
reasonable
but that
adjustments,
sometimes being
we can choose
misunderstood
not
is
to
what
distribute
frees
you.
you.
Because when
Then
nobody
don't,
expects
Clint
anything
said
from
simply.
you are
I'd
finally
rather the
free
film
to
never
become
be
exactly
seen than
what
be
you
seen
are.
wrong.
Clint Eastwood was
I've made
never
20
wrong
films.
for Hollywood.
I'll make more.
Hollywood
But I
was
won't
just
make
too
them
small
badly
for
to
who he was
satisfy
going to become.
executives who
What
think
makes
they know
this
my
story
work
stay
better
with
than I do
people
is
is
not
not
the
the
success.
stretched. Kellerman
Hollywood
was
is full of
calculating,
successful people.
trying to determine
What
if
makes
Clint
this
was
story
bluffing.
stay is the
If
quiet
pressure would
contrast between how
if there was
someone
any
was
leverage
seen
left and who they actually
but Clint
became.
wasn't bluffing.
Because when that
Everyone
executive
in that
looked
room
at Clint,
understood it.
he didn't see
He'd
potential.
walked away
He
from
saw
Warner Brothers
deviation.
once before.
He
in
compared Clint to a
1968.
template that
Built
already existed
Malpaso
in his
into
head
one of Hollywood's
and found
most
him
successful
incompatible.
production companies.
That is how most
He didn't need
misjudgments
the
happen.
studio.
Not
They
because
needed
someone
him.
is bad.
Can we have
but because
24
they are
hours to
different.
discuss internally?
Clint didn't
Take
fit
whatever
the shape
time
of the
you
era's
need.
heroes.
The film
He wasn't
stays the
charming
same
in the
either
traditional
way.
way.
The
He
executive
wasn't
left.
playful.
He
Clint's
wasn't
producer
theatrical.
turned to him. He
You'd
didn't
really
perform
shelve it?
emotions outwardly.
Without hesitation.
He held them inward.
I didn't wait
that
a
didn't
decade
make
to
him
make
empty.
a compromised
It
version.
made him dense.
This film,
Every movement meant something.
or no film.
24
Every
hours
pause meant
later,
something.
Kellerman called.
Every silence had
Warner
weight.
Brothers would distribute,
But that only
Unforgiven
becomes visible when
exactly
someone
as
stops
Clint
trying
had
to
cut it
fit
and starts
No
becoming.
changes to the
And
ending.
that takes time.
No
Most
softening
people
of
don't
violence.
fail because they lack talent.
No redemption arc.
They fail because
the studio
they give
was
up
betting
while they are still
$14 million
invisible.
that
Clint survived the
understood his
invisible
audience
years.
better than they
He
did.
survived the years
Unforgiven
when nobody
opened in
watched.
August
The
1992.
years when nobody praised.
The marketing
The years when
embraced
nothing
the
proved him
darkness.
right. Those
This
years
wasn't
are where
nostalgia.
most stories end.
This was something
His
raw.
continued. Something
And when
honest.
success finally
Something
arrived,
uncompromising.
it didn't arrive as
Critics
noise.
responded with
It arrived
astonishment.
as inevitability.
Roger Ebert gave
People
it 4
didn't
stars.
suddenly fall in love
The
with
New
him.
York Times called
They
it a
slowly
realized he had been there all along.
Variety declared
that
it
shift is powerful.
Clint's finest
It's the moment when the world
achievement.
catches up to someone
Every
who
review
never stopped
highlighted
moving
exactly
forward.
what the studio
That
had
is why
feared,
the meeting
moral
years later
complexity,
felt heavy.
the unflinching violence,
Not because of anger,
the refusal to
but
provide
because of
easy
contrast.
answers.
Two
The
men
ending
in the
Kellerman
same
had
room,
wanted to change
15
William
years
Money
apart in
killing an
trajectory.
unarmed man.
One had been
riding
certain,
into darkness.
the other had been
disappearing
patient.
from history.
Certainty is
was
loud.
singled out as one
Patience
of the most
is
powerful
quiet.
conclusions
And time
in Western
listens to
cinema.
patience.
Everything they'd
That
been afraid
executive
of
believed
became
his
the
film's
film's
greatest
greatest
strength.
accuracy. The box
Clint
office
believed
told
time
the same
would reveal
story.
the truth.
Opening weekend,
only one of them was right.
$15 million.
And maybe that is the deepest message
Strong
in this
for a
entire
dark
story.
western. Not that
With
you
no
should
young
ignore
stars,
criticism. Not that
and
you
a
should
hard
reject
R rating.
feedback. But that you
then,
should be careful
something
whose
unusual
voice you let
happened.
become the narrator
Something
of your
that
life.
almost never happens
Because some
with
people
challenging,
speak from knowledge,
morally complex
and some people
films.
speak from
It
habit.
held.
Some people
Week
see
after week,
and some people
audiences
only kept
see
coming.
what they already understand.
Word of mouth
Clint
was
Eastwood
extraordinary.
didn't defeat his
People
doubter.
weren't just
He
recommending
outgrew
him; they were
and that is
insisting
always the
friends
most
see
complete
it.
kind of victory.
This wasn't just
There is something
entertainment.
uncomfortable
This was
about
something that
stories
needed
like
to be
this,
witnessed,
because they
The
quietly
film played
expose how
theaters for
fragile
months,
authority really
crossed
is.
100 million
The
domestic.
executive believed his opinion
International
was a verdict.
audiences responded
He
even
believed
more
his
powerfully.
position gave his words
Final
weight.
worldwide
And in that
gross.
moment,
They
$159
They
million
affected Clint.
against a
They
$14 million
lingered.
budget.
They hurt.
Over 11
But
times
authority
its cost
is temporary.
One of the most
Time
profitable films
is
of
not.
1,000
Time tests everything.
900
It tests
and
confidence.
92. It tests
Proof that audiences were
assumptions.
hungry for exactly
It
the
tests
kind of
predictions.
uncompromising
It tests
adult
the stories
filmmaking
people tell
the
themselves
studio
about
had been
who belongs
terrified
and
to
who
release.
doesn't.
But
And
over
the real
time,
vindication
only
came in
what is
March
real
1993. The
Clint's
Academy
strength
Award
was not that he ignored
Unforgiven
doubt.
received 9
It's that he
nominations.
didn't let doubt choose his
Best
direction.
Picture,
Best
He listened,
director, absorbed,
Best Actor for
and then
Clint,
quietly kept walking
Best Supporting
forward.
Actor for Gene
That
Hackman.
ability to keep moving
The
without
studio
applause
executives
is
who
rare.
wanted to soften
Most
the ending
people need
sat
reinforcement.
watching as the film
Most
they'd
people
nearly
need
killed
confirmation.
swept the ceremony.
Most people
Gene
need
Hackman
someone
won
else to
Best
say,
Supporting Actor
yes,
for playing the brutal
you're on the
sheriff.
right path.
In
Clint
his
didn't
speech,
get that.
He thanked
So he
Clint for
became
having
his
the
own
courage to tell a
confirmation.
difficult story.
That is not
honestly.
glamorous.
That
The
is
film
lonely.
won
That
Best
is
Editing.
slow. That is
Editor
uncertain.
Joel Cox
but it
thanked
is
Clint
powerful
for trusting the vision.
When people talk about
When
resilience,
Clint won Best Director,
they imagine
his
dramatic
speech was
moments,
brief.
standing ovations.
He thanked his crew,
heroic speeches,
his producers,
big emotional
He
turning
pointedly
points.
did not thank
But
any
real
studio
resilience is
executives for
boring.
believing in the film
It's showing
or
up again
supporting
when
his
nothing
vision.
changes.
He'd believed in it
It's
himself.
trying again when nobody
That
notices.
had been enough.
It's continuing.
And when
without
Unforgiven
feedback.
won Best
Clint did
Picture,
that for
the night's
years.
biggest honor,
not
Clint's
in a visible
acceptance
way,
captured
not in a
everything.
storybook way.
I've been lucky to
but in
work
a
with
human
people
way.
who trusted the
He
story
kept
we were
practicing.
telling,
He kept
who
adjusting.
understood what we
He
were
kept
trying
learning.
to say.
He kept
This film is
accepting that
exactly what
progress
it needed
doesn't
to be.
announce itself.
I'm grateful
and
it
when
found
it
its
finally
audience.
did become visible,
4 Oscars.
it looked effortless to everyone else.
$159 million.
That is always the illusion.
Universal critical
People
acclaim.
think success arrives
Everything
suddenly
Warner
because
Brothers
they've
had
been
been
certain
watching
wouldn't
during the
happen
quiet
with a dark,
years.
violent,
They only see the
morally
wave,
complex Western
not the
had happened
tide.
anyway.
They only see the
Robert
arrival,
Kellerman sat
not
through
the
that
journey.
ceremony
They
watching
only
the film
see the
he wanted to
confidence,
change win
not the
award
uncertainty.
after award.
They only see the result.
Every trophy was a
not the
reminder of how
refusal to
wrong
quit.
he'd been.
Clint's
how wrong
presence
the
on
studio's
screen
instincts
felt
had been.
powerful because
How
it was
close they'd
earned.
come to
It
destroying
wasn't
a masterpiece
manufactured.
with their fear. It wasn't polished
After that
into
night,
place. Warner Brothers
was
never
built through
again
time,
suggested changes to a
discomfort,
Clint Eastwood
repetition,
film. They'd learned what should have
survival.
been obvious
That is
from
why
the
it
start.
lasted.
And that is why
Eastwood
when he
says a
walked
film
back
is
into that
exactly what it
studio
needs to
years
be,
later,
you
the
trust
moment
it.
carried weight.
The executives who'd pushed
not
for
because
changes
of what he
quietly
said,
moved to less
but because
prominent
of who he
positions
had
over the
become.
following years.
His words mattered.
Their judgment
because his
had been
life supported
exposed.
them. Anyone
Their
can
instincts
claim to
about
be right.
audiences had been
Few
proven
people can return with
catastrophically
proof.
wrong. The executive
Their attempt
had
to
been confident.
override one of
Clint had
cinema's
been
greatest
consistent.
filmmakers had been
Confidence is
documented
loud.
in the most public way
Consistency
possible
is
at
quiet.
the Academy Awards.
But only one of them creates
Clint
momentum.
kept making films.
That meeting wasn't about
The
revenge.
Bridges of Madison County.
It wasn't about humiliation.
Mystic River.
It wasn't about
$1
winning
Million
an argument.
Baby.
It was about
Gran
resolution.
Torino. It was
American
about closing
Sniper.
a chapter that had been
Dozens
left open
more
for
over
too
the next
long.
3 decades.
Clint didn't need to punish
Many
the
of
man.
them dark.
He didn't need to embarrass
Many
him.
of them challenging.
He didn't need
None
to
of them
destroy him.
compromised.
He simply needed
Unforgiven
to stop
became
carrying
more
the
than a
story
great
that
film.
had been handed to him.
It
It
became
became
a
a
case
case
study
study
taught in
it wasn't
film
a
schools
rejection
and
of
business
Universal
programs alike.
It was a rejection
A
of the
lesson
old
in
narrative.
artistic
It
integrity,
was a refusal to
defeating
continue
commercial
defining
calculation
himself through someone
The
else's
story of a
lens.
director willing to
And that
destroy
is
his
something
own
far
work
more people
rather
need
than
than they
betray his
realize.
vision.
Not
And a warning to
revenge,
executives
not
who think they
validation,
understand art
not
better than the
applause,
artists
but
creating it.
authorship. The
Today,
ability to write your own
Unforgiven
meaning
is
onto your own
considered one of the
life.
greatest
The ability
westerns
to
ever
decide
made.
what matters.
One of Clint
The ability
Eastwood's
to choose
finest
which
achievements.
voices you internalize.
The ending Warner
the ability
Brothers
to let
wanted
some
to change
opinions
dark,
remain external.
violent,
The world will
offering
always
no
offer you
redemption
versions
studied
of
as a
yourself.
perfect
It
example
will
of
offer
how
you
to
identities.
conclude a revisionist
It will offer
western.
you limits.
Because Because Clint understood something the studio didn't. It will offer you stories about what you are and what you are not. Sometimes they want
Some
truth.
of those stories are useful.
Truth. Some are
Delivered
lazy.
with courage and
Some
craft.
are projections.
Is more powerful
Some are
than
fear.
any focus
Some
grouped
are
happy
comfort.
ending could ever
Some
be.
are convenience. If this story
And it is
showed
your
you that the right
responsibility to
choice
choose
is
which
rarely the
ones you
safe
accept.
choice,
Clint
and that
accepted the
sometimes the
story
most
that
powerful
required
move is
patience.
refusing to
He
compromise
rejected the
on
story
what
that
matters.
required surrender.
Subscribe and
And
share
because
it with
of that,
someone who needs
his
to
life
remember
unfolded
that
differently,
integrity has a
not
way
better. not
of
easier,
being vindicated,
not faster.
What would
but
you have done in
truer.
that screening room?
And truth has a
Tell me
gravity
in the
that
comments.
performance never does.